think this is a really interestingly girlish moment for this writer, known for her outrageously authoritative tone, right? I mean, you know, freedom is, judgment is. There's no, oh, well, maybe for the purposes of, you know, consideration, we might consider that freedom is a spontaneous. No, we don't get that from her. We get bold declaratives, authoritative prose. I'm not sure she gives orders, and obviously she's very angry at Eichmann for following orders. She's against following orders, and she even looks to Kant to provide a notion of kind of free judgment that would be the opposite of following orders. So Kant would be a girl, I guess, if, okay, well, in any case, I thought, okay, so here we are, giving orders. Then she says, I do not know if I'm right or not. And then she adds, in any case, more or less unconsciously, or rather more or less consciously, I opted for this opinion, the opinion that there are certain domains where that are proper, that are not proper for a woman, especially one who wants to preserve her feminine qualities. Okay. More or less unconsciously, or rather more or less consciously, as if there is a difference. Just trying to think whether there's a difference between those two claims. More or less unconsciously, more or less consciously. I opted for this opinion. I opted for this opinion. I chose it. Did I choose it unconsciously? Did I choose it consciously? I'm not sure. But this structures her, and it's one reason why she must protest. Interesting kind of feminine protest. She must protest against the interpolation as a philosopher in order to preserve her feminine qualities. So apparently women cannot be philosophers, or women cannot yet be philosophers. Maybe one day there will be one, she says, as if there's ever going to be one that's more substantial than her. Maybe. I don't know. We haven't seen it. And women who give orders lose their feminine qualities. Although she is kind of ordering him, I must protest, do not call me that. Do not call me a philosopher is a certain kind of order. Or at least it's a request, but it's an order. Who gives orders? Philosophy, like giving orders, belongs to men. Arendt does not want to lose her feminine qualities by becoming a philosopher or by giving orders. And so perhaps some question of sexual difference haunts this disclaimer of hers. She's not a philosopher, she's not a man. But perhaps someday there will be a woman philosopher. Unclear whether that woman philosopher will be a man or whether she will be a woman. It would seem to depend on changes in femininity or in the order of gender itself. I'm not quite sure what her speculation is. But there seems to be a heterosexual problem in the becoming of a philosopher, and she's preserving, I think, that heterosexuality by disclaiming philosophy. She does not want to be a guy among guys. And though she gave up philosophy long ago, she gave up Heidegger long ago. To whom did she give up philosophy long ago? Maybe she gave it up to Heidegger long ago, and now operates within the supposedly feminized domain of political theory as a way of preserving the masculinity of philosophy, defending her man, and taking her distance from him, claiming the public sphere, even the sphere of action, over and against that solitary one. He was a miserable politician, as we all know. She, however, theorizes politics in grand and very important ways. So what is she doing? Is she defending her man, or is she triumphing over her man, or is she doing, in fact, both at once, more or less unconsciously, more or less consciously? By entering politics or the political sphere, let's remember from the human condition, she's entered the public sphere, which is paradigmatically masculine, the one from which women are excluded. So tell me, is she preserving her feminine qualities, or is she becoming hypermasculine at such a moment? Both at once? It would seem that there's either a conscious or unconscious choice option that she has made, one that vacillates between conscious and unconscious, and which accordingly does not quite obey the logic of non-contradiction. Two opposing trends coexist in this discursive formation. She's not a philosopher, so she stays a woman. She rejects philosophy to become a political theorist. She rejects solitariness in order to think about politics, the public sphere, plurality, a domain that is traditionally masculine, that she herself names as masculine. So does she lose her feminine qualities by becoming a political theorist, or does she find the venue by which to become a man, a man separate from Heidegger? Is she also preserving and discarding a certain heterosexual organization of gender at the same time, staying attached to her man, defending her man, leaving him, triumphing over him? A little maybe Kleinian problematic there. So if we entered this speculation and sought to put Heidegger in the place of the philosopher, or at least say that maybe Heidegger is one kind of valence at work here in the discourse on philosophy, could we then ask whether Arendt successfully distinguishes thinking and action, philosophy and politics? What's the relation between thinking as a form of keeping company with oneself and action as a way of participating in and enacting human plurality, which includes being able to consider or make present to oneself, you may remember, the point of view of others, something that's not immediately clear to me. So you'll remember, those of you in my class, that when Arendt claims that Eichmann failed to think, she claims he fails to think, he fails to maintain a discourse with himself, reflexivity of some kind, but also fails to take into account the standpoint of others. So there is, maintain a relation to what she calls the presence of others. So thinking does imply this relation to others, indeed in plurality. So if Eichmann fails to think, and his failure is a failure to enter into a certain kind of self-dialogue and to keep himself company, but if it's also a failure to think from the standpoint of somebody else, then it seems to me that thinking implies the very plurality that belongs to the sphere of politics, at which point I'm not at all clear that we can make a rigorous distinction between thinking and action, between the solitary and the plural. Okay, so I'm just going to stop there for now and suggest the following. I'd like to look at these texts in some greater detail, but let's also remember that when Arendt thinks about thinking, I think she's inevitably thinking about Heidegger, and when she says Eichmann did not think or was unable to think or failed to think, and she vacillates among those formulations, she has an idea of thinking in mind, which I think to some degree is derived from Heidegger, whose what is called thinking is obviously operative in her text, and whose failure to think on occasion is also operative in her text. Right? Okay. I'll just see whether you all have something to say.
I think we do wish to respond to you, and certainly I'm wondering if you will make some remarks next. I will just be the operator at this moment and point out that that we are, well, does an operator do this? Butt into everyone's business. This one does. So we have prepared 2 texts for today, and the third text will have been this interview, which establishes itself as a scenography of sexual difference and a kind of ironization of question and answer, to which, as we just heard in a very imposing and compelling way, Hannah Arendt, with which she negotiates, the terms of which she rejects, and there's a kind of, let's say, dramaturgy of repudiation. She's not this, she's not that, but I